Good evening, everyone, at least for those who are in my time zone. Yeah. So we are going to talk about DPG compliant payment hub for the next few minutes, half an hour or so. And indirectly, we'll also be talking about how Netflix Conductor is being used as microservice orchestration layer in our payment hub. So jumping right into uh, so talking about my organization, that's Fynarfin. Uh, so uh, Uh, in Fynarfin, we are enhancing the global financial system and expanding the economic fairness and opportunity for people worldwide through our payment solutions for organizations, governments, and developers. Uh, Moving ahead. Right. So, one of the major theme around Fynarfin is financial well-being. So, we work with like the main pillars are assisted banking platform, bulk disbursement and collections, personalized line of credit and integrating government staff. So, like basically, the idea is to tackle the low penetration of ATMs and POS along with low card acceptance, which leads to the retail transactions ending up in cash a lot of times. So talking about the impact of NRFN is like we have an impact of right now 250 crore loan portfolio and 10 million transactions going on per year. Yeah. Now, a bit about me. I'm software developer at Fynarfin. I've previously worked at Vadmani Foundation and Clover Bay Technologies. I'm open source contributor to MIFO's initiative. Just to give a brief idea on what MIFO's initiative is, it's a US-based nonprofit that exists to support and collectively lead to open source MIFO's X project. Its goal is to speed the elimination of poverty by enabling financial service providers to more effectively and efficiently deliver responsible financial services to the world's like 2.5 billion poor and unbanked. So basically, it works on financial inclusion around the world. So I'm also passionate about competitive programming, and I've done my BTech from Bennett University, Delhi, NCR, India. Moving ahead. So talking about Payment Hub. Hub is owned by Mifos, and here at Fynarfin, we develop and maintain Payment Hub. We keep on adding the core functionalities to the Payment Hub, plus create uh, implementation specific features for client specific requirements. So the Payment Hub is a highly scalable and extensible orchestration engine for digital and real-time payments, which enables participation in any digital payment ecosystem. Talking about the Payment Hub environment, Payment Hub supports multi-tenancy. So, like multiple organizations can use the same instance of Payment Hub while maintaining the data isolation and with the security protocols. Payment Hub supports multiple connectors for payment schemas, like some of the famous ones like Mojaloop connector, Mobile Money connector, and we have connectors for our account management system as well. So we have Apache Finrack connector, Apache Finrack CN connector, other core banking connectors. Uh, Payment Hub has omni-channel services for customers, which includes mobile app, web app, POS, cards, etc. So, talking about some of the digital payments use case supported by Payment Hub Enterprise Editions like mobile money and merchant payments, and it's like more of uh, covering disbursements, P2P transfers, mobile collections, request to pay, QR code payments, all these according to the GSMA mobile money API standards. Then we have bulk payments and G2P. So like pre-processing of bulk payment list and payment initiation and orchestration of G2P flows like social protection programs, conditional cash transfer, benefit payments, and more, right? We have real-time payments. We have cross-border remittance like international remittances, uh, open banking and finance, central bank digital currencies, and like instant and inclusive payment systems and like basically wholesale cross-border payments, right? Uh, like it powering closed and open loop cross-border remittance systems, including the transformation mapping layer between Mojalo and ISO message standard. So, so why orchestration? Yeah. So where does the orchestration come into picture? Like when we have a microservice-based architecture for payment hub. So first of all, it helps us in decoupling, right? So you can have the different sets of logic separated out in different microservices, and they can still be communicating with each other very easily through the orchestration layer. You have real-time consistency, which actually becomes very important in the payment systems, right? And orchestration has its unique set of advantages over choreography. And it was chosen in our payment stack microservice architecture, which was cloud native. Now, microservice orchestration and payment hub, like how does it help us, right? So we can execute flows by mere configurational changes, right? We can just add flows or map flows to different configurational parameters to make different flows run on different triggers. Right? We can orchestrate any end-to-end workflow across systems by creating additional workers and simply configuring new workflows. We can explicitly define and model workflows that span multiple microservices and gain detailed visibility into how our workflow is performing. Let's talk about what is DPG because that was also the topic of this. The word was in the topic of us, the, the, the thing that we're talking about, right? So DPG stands for Digital Public Goods Alliance, right? DPG, that's Digital Public Goods. These goods are open software data or content that can be used, shared, and modified freely, and they contribute to various social and economical objectives. Uh, Now, when we know right now we chose orchestration, but now why conductor? So it has a like the it goes like the core orchestration piece in the original design was eBay, like, and it had its own custom permissive non-copyleft license. While ZBay is a good fit for resiliency and scalability, but there was a need for an alternative orchestration engine which is highly scalable and has a similar permissive license recognized globally and especially by Digital Public Goods Alliance. This will essentially enable governments to trust our software based on DPG's recommendation that our payment hub ticks off all the boxes to be officially recognized as digital public good. Now that was the requirement part. That's why we moved towards conductor. But you choosing conductor also brings a lot of perks along with it, right? Uh, some of the perks which benefited me, especially while implementing a payment hub with the conductor as an orchestration layer, was ability to extend conductor, right? There's a lot of places where we can, where open configurations and extensibility features provided, where you can configure it as per your requirements. They're very easy to use client SDKs. The conductor UI is very helpful when you're trying to set up, trying to do POC or debug. It helps really well there. Then Orkes was also helpful to me while in this entire POC prototype. I'll talk about it more in the further how I used Orkes in that. Right? One of the important thing was community support, like the really active Slack channel, which was open for taking queries and resolving doubts. So that helped a lot while doing this prototype with Conductor. So actually, I how I used Orkut was I used Orkut Playground to generate business workflows. So actually, I avoided the learning curve of creating workflows because here you could create workflow from a very fantastic UI and just use the JSON generated code and put it in your conductor UI. So that was one thing which saved a lot of time to me. Now let's talk about the payment hub and Netflix conductor connection, right? How we worked alongside each other. Now, just to show, like this is the architectural design of payment hub with Netflix conductor as the orchestration in the center. So we have a lot of microservices, like all our payment schema connectors, all our account management system connectors are microservices, right? So Moja Loop or AMS, Finrack, these are independent microservices and they have the logic worker logics in them, right? And Netflix Conductor has the workflows where we have worker tasks whose logics are implemented inside this microservices layers. Now we created an exporter which pushes the data from the Netflix conductor to a Kafka cluster. Now, this exporter actually pushes the data related to any changes in the status of a task or the changes in the status of the workflow. Uh, Whenever one task moves from one status to another, like completed, from start to completed or in processing, same goes for workflow. At every step, when the status changes, this exporter uh, pushes the payload to the Kafka cluster as it is. Then we have an operation streamer. We also call it importer module, which reads from the data stream and parses it to make it compatible to be saved in our database. And then we have operations apps and operations front end. So operation app has all the APIs to communicate with the database, and operations front end is which gives a UI to see the data in the database, right, through the operations app APIs. So yeah, so Netflix Conductor was the central. Okay, now like we already had the payment hub with a different orchestrator. Now we wanted to do minimal changes while doing a POC with the new orchestration that is Netflix Conductor. So it was actually the idea was to do minimal changes in the payment hub, and we were able to actually do it. We were able to abstract a lot of uh, worker implementation parts where we could have abstract classes for starting of a workflow or running the logic for a simple worker or worker task. The main logic went into the exporter and the operation streamer because the payload was completely different of what we were receiving from Netflix Conductor. Moving ahead. So the major steps that were into implementing this prototype was the first we had to set up Netflix Conductor. Now, we at Fynarfin we work with Helm charts. So at Mifos, like the payment hub and all are based on the deployment is based with Helm chart. So we had to create a complete working Helm chart which would deploy Netflix Conductor in a single step. And we also created a complete Helm chart for the complete prototype, which we have in open source in Mifos repositories. Now, then the second part was to design workflow, and I mentioned how I used Orkes for that. Then we created an exporter module, and then we wrote an importer module. Then, as I mentioned, that we didn't wanted to change a lot of already existing components of Payment Hub. We just wanted to make those changes that were affected by the orchestration layer. So we reuse the operations app, we reuse other microservices, and only modified the orchestration parts. So the system design for the prototype was like the conductor running the workflows, and then at every trigger of any task status change or workflow status change, the data was pushed to Kafka. Then the importer module read the data from the Kafka and parsed the data and saved it to the MySQL database. And then we have the Ops app that's communicating with the database for the APIs and front end. Yeah, moving forward. Uh, so Netflix conductor setup, like conductor server is the most important component when we are setting up Netflix conductor instance. Conductor UI, as I said, was optional for a requirement, but we found it beneficial in debugging and checking out the status of the workflows and taking on the what's the current status like. Then another thing was that there were multiple options for the database, but we went ahead with PostgreSQL. And just to mention, like Netflix Conductor provides configurational options, where you can select different options available from the database, or you can put up own choice of database. Then the indexer was Elasticsearch and cache by default is Redis, but again that's a configurational thing, and we configured it for PostgreSQL. Talking about the exporter module, so this is somewhere we use the uh, feature of extensibility of in, Netflix Conductor. Right? As I mentioned that Netflix Conductor provides us a lot of options to expand the implementation. So in exporter module, basically what we did is we created a custom workflow status listeners and custom task status listeners at and these custom workflow status listeners were nothing but just what they did was they every time when they receive the payload on any task change or status change, they just push it into the Kafka stream. Then I also already mentioned the importer module was receiving the data from the Kafka stream and processing it and saving the database, and operations app was reading to the database. Then let's look into the complete workflow of how what the prototype workflow was and as a part of the POC. And let's instead of looking at here, let's go to the Orkes uh, screen to actually look at it. So one other thing that I want to point out, like the no code parts of Netflix Conductor, right? So we don't have to have the implementation for all the tasks in our uh, code base. There are a lot of uh, no code options, right? Like set variable or making an HTTP call. So these options helps us uh, eliminating the unnecessary parts which needs not to be put in the code. Like for example, let's first go like this is a simple, very simple task which I'm using just to set up some initial variables, right? And just to point out, like this workflow would start from one microservice where the a channel connector, when the transfer is triggered, when the transfer API is called, this workflow will start from there, right? So we are using client SDKs to start the workflow. Now, then we have this party lookup. Now, the idea of the prototype was to mock the pay parts, right? And just block and book funds from the payer side. So now by in general, what would we have done is for even for the mock parts, we would have to have some code implementations. But now here the no code option just gives us to simply put up a variable, right? Like I just put up a party lookup variable failed, which is by default false. So party lookup won't fail. So I didn't have to had a code implementation of it. Then this is the switch task which eventually checks. But since we have mocked the party lookup part, so it obviously go to the default case as always. Then we have block funds. So this is again a simple task. So it has its implementation is one of our microservice that is AMS Mifos connector, right? So this block funds is what going to do is it's going to block fund from the payer side account. And yeah, that's it. Again, then we have a switch task which will check for the transfer prepare field. So this block fund task would put up a variable in the workflow, which will be transfer prepare failed, which will point out that the was it successful or the blocking was successful or not. So based on that, it will decide on which part to go, and if it fails, then the workflow will get terminated. If it does not fail, then it will move to the default path where we have the transfer request. And again, we have mocked this part. As I mentioned earlier, this was an additional benefit of using Netflix Conductor. Again, the switch. And then we move to the default case where we book funds. So again, this is a simple worker task and which has its implementation of the microservice. Uh, this books the fund from the payer. So it's that step. It's the step where we deduct amount from the payer account. Now this will again put up a variable and then workflow, which would be checked at this switch step, which will check for the transfer create was failed or not. And based on that, we'll either the workflow will end successfully or will be terminated. So this was the workflow that we had in our prototype, which was completed successfully, yeah, in the testing phase. Getting back to the PPT, yeah. So yeah, so resources like uh, obviously I mentioned the pay.orkes.io, then Netflix Conductor Slack. I reached out to the Slack community multiple times regarding the doubts and extensibility features on how to proceed with that and what are some good practices? Is it something good or not? Then we had a really extensive and clearly communicated documentations for Netflix Conductor, which really helped in this prototyping. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we Q&A, like if somebody has any questions, we can take that up and or something that I need to clarify on. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ankit. It's very insightful, real use case that you presented. And I think you're very close to what we call a composable business and making new partnership from Fynarfin now should be easier than ever with the platform that you built. This is quite impressive, actually. I liked also the part about you talk about the unnecessary code that was avoided to write thanks to some system task that was already
Right.
available in Conductor. And usually, you know, this is something, okay, we're going to code it anyway. It's not the fact that it costs a lot to develop, but this is something you have to maintain, and over time it will create a technical debt for sure. So happy that you recognize that part was very useful in your case. I have actually a small question. When did you start working with Conductor?
I actually started working with Conductor, I guess, 2 months back.
That's impressive. And what was the learning curve to arrive to that level?
Yeah, so actually the learning curve was really sharp. And just to point out, right, like how the Slack community helped me in my learning curve because it was very easily reachable and people responded really quickly with accurate answers and people were ready to solve my doubts. So uh, that helped me with learning curve really fast to get my learning curve shortened. Yeah.
Music to my ear. Thank you so much, Ankit. I'm going to take back the flow.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. There is one question from the audience that we would like to
Yeah.
ask. How did you test? What do you suggest type of testing is done with this framework? Which is a very interesting
Uh,
question because test is always something that not we forget, but at the very beginning when we choose a platform, we the level of priority we don't put it as a high priority.
if you are saying testing about the overall system in the payment hub or the in complete POC, so in general we use Cucumber testing to test our entire prototypes, right? Entire workflows in general. So we if I'm getting the question correctly, so then we use the multiple APIs that uh, Conductor server supports. So we used to check like going step by step. So first we used to check the liveness test of Conductor through those APIs, its liveness, and then we would trigger the workflows, right? And then we have APIs to check the status of the workflows, right? So we check if the workflow is getting in the completion status or not, or what status it's stuck in. Then, uh, but the complete the overall integration test to be talked about. As I mentioned that the data finally flows into the operations side, right, where we save into database. So we check it for there that what's the completion state of the and what are the variables like in as I mentioned like in our workflow we put up a lot of variables like setting variables or a task outputs variables. So that exporter module when it pushes the payload and the importer module then receives the payload and passes them. So we even save those variables into our database, each and every variable. So we check the what was the party lookup variable value, and we can check it up to which state it till the our workflow passed correctly, right? So that's a very internal thing of how we test Payment Hub in general and not specific to Conductor. If you ask, if the question was to specific to Conductor, if you can clarify.
Yeah, I would like to remind also to add to what you said that we can develop full from using the SDK. We can develop also some tests that will test everything that you have in your workflow. So this is documented if you go to the documentation of Conductor.